Greetings everyone and welcome back to Joe's Metal Mancave vlog. Today I have what I'm officially going to dub a analog black metal collection update. Let's get into it, shall we? Alrighty then. So to kick things off, we have 4 bootleg cassette tapes to talk about, and I got these in a trade from a fellow YouTuber who calls his channel Dark Hymns from the Cold North. And he told me he got them from a guy in Europe and he was selling them through his channel, and I picked them up. These 4 cassettes I'm going to show in their original released form are extremely rare and almost impossible to get these days unless you have a substantial amount of money to spend, which I do not. As it is, I'm not really a big supporter of bootlegs, but considering that these recordings to get in the original format is almost impossible, I just decided to pick these up and see what they were like. The first 2 bands I'm going to talk about come from the Les Légions Noires, or LLN, or the Black Legions scene from France. The Black Legions, in case you do not know, was basically an elite grouping of black metal and dark ambient projects and bands from France in the early 90s. Altogether, there was something like 20 to 25 bands and projects involved in this, although interestingly, there was only actually about 5 to 10 people involved in these various bands and projects. So it's not as if the Black Legions was this huge thing. No, it was a small group of friends, colleagues that were extremely dedicated to just raw, true black metal back in the day. Now, interesting thing about the Black Legions is this stuff was extremely hard to get back in the day, and generally speaking, it was almost all self-released and was basically just sent out to elite individuals that the bands felt deserved it. Me personally, the only thing I've ever really heard from the scene is the Belkètre and Vlad Tepes March to the Black Holocaust album, which was originally released in 1996 by Embassy Productions, but has later on been re-released several times by Drakkar Productions from France. By most accounts, this is probably the cream of the crop as far as the Black Legions is concerned, and it probably explains why it's generally been not too hard to track down. With that being said then, up first is Torgeist and their debut demo, Devoted to Satan. Devoted to Satan was originally released in 1994 and is a classic example of raw, just total garage-sounding black metal, so to speak. When listening to this demo, I am pretty much instantly reminded of Ildjarn from Norway, although it's kind of interesting to note that the first Ildjarn album did not come out until 1995, although I believe he had demos as early as January of 1992. Whether or not that was an influence on Torgeist is hard to say, but what we basically have here is raw, sort of punkish, and almost kind of live-sounding black metal. Yes, it basically sounds like a band jamming in their garage or their basement or something like that. The production is abysmally raw, but everything is heard well enough, and it's just, even though it's sloppy and generally not like the best black metal recording I've personally ever heard, there's a certain, charisma to this. It just is very infectious and I can't really turn it off. I would definitely describe this demo as being gritty and raw and just ugly sounding. It doesn't really have an evil tone to it, but just the hate-filled sentiment is very obvious when you listen to it. Of course, this is the only thing I've heard from Torgeist now, and I find it to be interesting, but outside of this demo, all they had was one other demo and a split record in the mid to late 90s. So yeah, if you're into more raw and punky and garage-sounding black metal, you'll definitely dig this, but outside of this demo, the band only released one other demo and a split album in the mid-90s. Continuing on, we have a band that I've already mentioned here, and that band is Belkètre and their album which, well, I don't know how to pronounce that. Google Translate if you don't mind. Right then. So another really just interesting thing about the Black Legions is they had what I perceive to be like their own, I guess, private language, as there were several demos and song titles, and I think even some of the projects were basically derived from this private language they created. Belkètre is probably one of the more well-known black metal bands from the Black Legions. They were a little more prolific, and they also had, of course, the split with Vlad Tepes, which I guess a lot of people know. Yes, this is just raw, hate-filled, evil-sounding black metal. It's interesting because you can't even like compare this to something like Darkthrone or any of the Norwegians. I mean, I'm sure that influence was there for them, but they definitely took it in this much more twisted, dark, just, again, abysmal sounding black metal direction that is very unique to the Black Legions. This is music that was certainly never meant to be spread around the world, and it was only meant to, land in the ears of very select individuals. I am surely not one of those individuals, but nevertheless, as I've always enjoyed that Vlad Tepes split, I had to hear, so I wanted to hear more stuff from this band. I believe this has been re-released on a compilation for Belkètre. You know, as far as the Black Legion is concerned, Belkètre, Vlad Tepes, and Mutilation are the sort of the more popular bands in that scene, I guess, and the ones that were a little more prolific and generally had just really good material. I didn't mention this in the earlier review, but each of these bootleg tapes was limited to just 50 copies, so I would assume by now these have been distributed, and those that were lucky enough to get one got one, but yeah, man, I'm super happy to have this in my collection. Just a cool little item and a document of the early French black metal scene. I should also say that the overall volume on these first 4 tapes I'm going to show is extremely low. Typically on my stereo I turn up to 50 and I can hear things just perfectly, but for these tapes I had to turn it up to anywhere between 90 and 95 just to hear it decently. So I don't know if that's a reflection of how these demos originally sounded or what, but definitely it's a bootleg and it definitely shows those limitations in sound and quality. Well, continuing on, we have Ulver and their Rehearsal 1993. Ulver, of course, is one of the early Norwegian black metal bands that combined a more, I guess, sort of melodic and folk-infused sound into their otherwise raw black metal music. But of course, pretty quickly into Ulver's career, they shifted gears to a more electronic and avant-garde and even neoclassical and just plain inexplainable music style. For what it's worth, I have genuinely enjoyed everything Ulver's released over the years, but there's a few questionable releases, in the past 20 years, but it's just interesting that a band that had such humble and somewhat simplistic roots was able to branch out and become this much more elaborate and very, very diverse band. But let's turn the clock back to 1993 and this Rehearsal, which features the very first Ulver lineup. To the best of my knowledge, this was never actually released as a real official release. In fact, I think if it was available back in 93 or the early 90s in general, it was definitely spread as a bootleg or just maybe something the band was sending out to fans or friends and so on back in those days. I first became aware of this Rehearsal maybe back in like 2005 or something like that, when it was sort of spread amongst file sharing protocols as the Owns Triumph bootleg, which basically had this Rehearsal and the Vargnat demo. So this Rehearsal then, as I said, it features the first original Ulver lineup, which was Chris on vocals, Carl Michael on drums, A. Reza on guitar leads, Grelmond on guitar rhythm, Havard Jorgensen, who was the acoustic guitarist, and Mim Malmberg played bass. Generally speaking, I'm not really a big fan of Rehearsals. It's interesting from a historical perspective, but it's not really something I collect per se. But since this was Ulver, I wanted to, hear what these guys sound like in their most primordial form. And that is definitely what you get here on this tape. It is, it's just a Rehearsal, plain and simple. It sounds like it was recorded live. It's interesting seeing the early roots and just kind of seeing that, even from the get-go, that Ulver had a very unique take on Norwegian black metal. The only downside to this tape is that there is no vocals at all, even though Chris is credited as being the vocalist here. Very disappointing because, for me personally, I think black metal just really has to have vocals. I mean, I've always perceived the vocals as just being an instrument, so when you remove those vocals, it's like you've removed a very key instrument in a black metal recording. Nevertheless, this is interesting, and as I said, just the earliest known documentation of Ulver's music. Continuing on, we have Arckanum and their 1993 demo tape. This was the first sort of, I guess, proper release for Arckanum, as before this, all they had released was the Rehearsal tape. Arckanum has typically been seen as the solo project of Shamante, but on this earlier demo, his only role was the drums and a vocalist and guitarist were used instead. My understanding is that this 3-piece lineup would only last for a few months and then Shamante would continue on his own. Arckanum, if you don't know it, is sort of a raw, pagan black metal influenced band with just an extremely unique sound that is distinctively Arckanum, and just, although it has a sort of raw black metal framework to it, there's a lot of, I guess, more folk influences and just some really unique touches that I have just not heard in any other black metal band. However, on this early demo, it is pretty straightforward raw black metal. I want to say this is really great, but the overall volume on this demo is so low and just so muddled that it's almost hard to hear anything. Of course, it is just a demo, and nothing was, too serious here. But again, it's just interesting hearing an early documentation of a now classic black metal band. Interestingly, as well, is that Arckanum never really focused on the more typical Satanism or, I guess, anti-Christian topics. No, it was more centered around paganism and, I guess, what he calls anti-cosmic Satanism, which I believe is the same variation of Satanism that John Nodved from Dissection was involved with. Outside of Arckanum, Shamante has also been briefly involved with the black metal band Soren. He did an outro for Craft about 20 years ago, and he also had his roots with the blackened death metal band Grotesque. He's also author of various books on occult and paganism and, again, anti-cosmic Satanism. Never read any of his stuff personally, but it would definitely be interesting to kind of dive into it if I should ever come across it. Other than that, Arckanum is a band I have known about for a really long time, but for some reason I just never bought any of the full-length albums, and I guess this is my starting point. Even though I've heard those full-length albums, I have not yet acquired them in physical format, so perhaps that's something I should change soon. The next album I'm going to talk about was originally released in 2004 as a split LP, but has more recently been re-released by Woodcut Records in a few different formats. The album in question, then, is the Horna and Behexen self-titled split. By a lot of accounts, this is one of the best black metal splits ever, and surely a true highlight of the Finnish black metal scene. Horna, in case you don't know him, is one of the most powerful and enduring black metal bands of the Finnish black metal scene. Over the years, they have always maintained a raw black metal style and have resisted all the sort of trends and desires to push black metal in a more avant-garde or not so true direction. Yes, Horna are surely classic and now legendary and mandatory black metal band, and as such, one of my favorites. So what about this split then? Horna offers up to some of their most just hate-filled and just visceral and just evil-sounding recordings of their earlier career. While I have generally enjoyed everything I've heard from Horna, this one in particular, just the power and the hate and just the evilness oozing from it is just very infectious, and just instantly after, giving this tape a couple spins, it's become one of my favorite Horna recordings. As for Behexen, they offer a more occult-themed and generally speedier, but still raw black metal style. Behexen are surely a legendary band, a classic band, and almost everything they've released is just totally essential and mandatory in my opinion. In particular, I recommend their first album, Ritual Satanism, or their second album, By the Blessing of Satan. These guys are truly devoted, occult individuals, and it definitely shines through in this material, and it's always interesting that, just to see how far, and how true, I guess, Finnish black metal bands are with their occult beliefs and their devotion to Satanism. As a final thought, the overall volume in contrast to those other tapes I show is as it should be, and the sound is powerful and full, but while still, of course, being a raw black metal recording. Well then, one more final tape to talk about for this analog black metal collection update, and that tape is the Evilfeast and Marblebog split tape, which is called Eisenheimen and Abyss Calls. I got this tape in a recent purchase I made from Eastside Records as they had it in their distro, and it was released by Hammer of Damnation, and I was really looking forward to checking this out because I've just absolutely adored everything I've heard from Evilfeast. But when I put this in my cassette player, I found that, the tape was warped. Yeah, it kind of sounded like it was recorded underwater, so to speak. I know it's not the original recording because I looked it up on YouTube and I was like, oh, okay, that's what it sounds like. But this version I got was just warped, and it's really unfortunate because I really wanted to hear this. Fortunately, Eastside Records, they sent me the digital files for this, so I can conceivably record it to a blank tape, but obviously I would have preferred just the original tape I bought working here. I'm not sure if this is a known error for this Hammer of Damnation pressing, or I just got an unlucky copy, but either way, it kind of sucks. Nevertheless, if you know Evilfeast, you know it's a sort of raw symphonic black metal style, very aggressive, very dark and ethereal and some melancholy sounding, but just oh man, just great stuff. And as for Marblebog, it is sort of a, again, raw black metal style with a lot of synthesizers and generally raw production. And I've heard a few other recordings from this project, namely the Forest Heart album, which is decent and That's probably what I'll say about this album as well. It's decent, but it's just nothing that's really blowing me away. But I think I'm going to say this is probably the best Marblebog recording I have heard so far. So as I said before, it's a bit of a shame I can't listen to this in my cassette player as I would have preferred, but again, very cool of Eastside Records to send those files over for me. Well, that's it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this analog black metal collection update. I will see you next time on Joe's Metal Man Cave vlog.